Inevitably, echoes of past betrayals will surface. A harmless delay in text response might trigger panic. A friend's harmless joke might sting like mockery. Instead of chastising yourself for overreacting, you offer gentle inquiry. What unhealed memory is this poking? You soothe the trigger, remind yourself of current reality, and if necessary, communicate your need for reassurance rather than withdrawing in silent suspicion. Each honest exchange reinforces the notion that trust is a collaborative practice, not a fragile myth. Gradually, the external world mirrors your internal repair. You attract and sustain connections that honor your boundaries because you honor them first. You experience disagreements without catastrophe because you no longer fuse conflict with abandonment. You remember that trust isn't about guaranteed perfection. It's about mutual willingness to address imperfection with integrity. With discernment comes new criteria for intimacy. You shift focus from how much someone fascinates you to how consistently someone respects you. You measure compatibility not by shared interests alone, but by shared values, emotional accountability, and reciprocity. Trust, you realize, is less a leap and more a bridge. Constructed plank by plank through transparent conversation, observed behavior, and time. During this phase, patience is essential. Scar tissue around the heart tempts you to rush into connection as a distraction from loneliness, or to slam every door as a defense against risk. But true healing invites a middle way. Allow relationships to unfold at the pace of authenticity. Let trust grow organically, like light filtering through newly opened blinds, rather than flooding the room at once. Slow exposure to healthy interactions recalibrates your nervous system, teaching it that connection can feel safe again. This restoration is incremental. It's the small, consistent promises you keep to yourself. Getting up when the alarm rings, drinking water when thirst calls, closing the laptop when fatigue sets in. Each kept promise whispers, "I can rely on me." The tasks are mundane, but their cumulative message is profound. Self-trust is built in micro moments long before it's tested in pivotal ones. When betrayal strikes, it's easy to believe the fracture lies only between you and the person who wounded you. Yet the deepest breach often happens inside. You stop trusting your own judgment. You replay every warning you overlooked, every intuition you silenced, every boundary you softened. The mind whispers accusations. How could you not see it coming? Why did you let them in? Until confidence shrinks and self-doubt fills the empty space. Rebuilding trust therefore begins not with other people, but with the quiet covenant you make with yourself. It starts in the mirror before it can move into the world. You must relearn the language of your own instincts, the subtle tightening in your gut that signals danger, the gentle warmth in your chest that signals safety. You practice listening to the body's soft alarms instead of overriding them for the sake of harmony or approval. Apply this to every sphere. Family gatherings where old narratives bait you, workplace chaos fueled by someone else's insecurity, social media storms erupting from strangers' unresolved wounds. You pause, witness, breathe, release. You refuse to be the echo chamber for noise that is not yours. Over time, your inner world becomes less like a sponge and more like a clear lake, reflective, undisturbed, capable of mirroring truth without swallowing debris. Mindful detachment is a discipline, not a single epiphany. Some days you will slip, absorbing shadows you intended to observe. When that happens, forgive the lapse, shake off the weight, and return to the practice. Each repetition strengthens the neural pathways of calm resilience until detachment becomes less an effort and more a natural stance. open heart, firm roots, clear mind. This does not mean you lose compassion. In fact, your compassion gains clarity. Because you're no longer hijacked by reactivity, you can respond with wisdom instead of reflex. You can offer empathy without martyrdom, guidance without control, kindness without depletion. Detachment keeps your emotional well full, so what you give is overflow, not survival water. Practicing mindful detachment also reshapes your self-identity. You stop measuring your goodness by how much pain you can sponge up from others. You stop auditioning for worth through relentless caretaking. You start honoring the sovereignty of each soul's journey, including your own. You realize that allowing people to face the natural consequences of their choices is sometimes the most loving act you can offer, because it respects their capacity to grow. The practice begins with awareness of your body. Someone's harsh words arrive, your shoulders clench, your heart gallops. Instead of reacting, you breathe into that tightening, naming it. This is tension. Naming interrupts absorbing. It rewires the automatic fusion between their stimulus and your response. You remain the witness, curious, grounded, intact. Next comes the inner dialogue. When drama swirls, the mind writes scripts. I must fix this. I must defend. I must absorb their anger so they calm down. Mindful detachment answers with kinder truths. Their turmoil is theirs to metabolize. My role is to listen, not to carry. You learn to hold space instead of holding burdens. You let their feelings pass through the open door of presence and exit the opposite side, leaving no residue behind. Not every storm that passes through your life requires you to become rain-soaked in the downpour. Yet many of us stand unprotected beneath the emotional weather of others, feeling each drop as though it were fated for our skin. We call it empathy, but sometimes it is simply the absence of boundaries between what we witness and what we ingest. Mindful detachment invites a radical alternative: to be fully present to what is happening without letting it set up residence inside your nervous system. Detachment is often misunderstood as indifference, a cold dismissal of human connection. In truth, it is the art of compassionate distance. Picture a lighthouse on a cliff. It sees every turbulent wave, every pitchback night, but it remains anchored, illuminating the path for ships without being dragged into the sea. That is mindful detachment. Steady presence, unshaken core. There will be days you want to crawl back into numbness, when the weight of meaning-making feels like too much responsibility. On those days, revisit your why. Reread the messages from lives already touched by your story. Retouch the scar and remind yourself what it felt like before it closed. Purpose is not a straight path up a mountain. It's a spiral staircase. You will circle the same pain at higher altitudes, each rotation granting a broader view. Ultimately, transforming hurt into purpose is an act of defiance. It declares that what tried to break you will fund your becoming. It flips the script, from victim of circumstance to author of impact, from isolated suffering to interconnected healing. And in that defiance, you do more than just survive. You ignite a chain reaction of courage in every soul who witnesses your light shining through the cracks you once tried to hide. You ignite a chain reaction of courage in every soul who witnesses your light, shining through the cracks you once tried to hide. There is no light shining through the darkness to hide, because if you share from still open gashes, you risk dripping unprocessed pain onto the people you aim to help. Transformation also requires humility. Your story is powerful, but it is not the only story. Your lessons are precious, but they may not fit everyone's circumstance. Purpose that heals rather than harms is purpose offered, not imposed. It invites others to glean what resonates and discard what. It is less a sermon, more a lighthouse. Here's where I found rocks. Here's where I found calm water. Navigate as you need. And remember, purpose is not a performance for applause. Many acts of transformed pain happen offstage. A quiet kindness to a stranger who reminds you of your younger self. A policy you helped change because you suffered under its former version. A family culture you rewrite so your children inherit freedom and not fear. These are victories no crowd will ever cheer, but they re-engineer the future. What did this loss teach me about what I truly value? How can my story spare someone else the same sorrow? Which parts of me grew resilient in the dark? These questions don't romanticize suffering, they harvest meaning from it. Maybe your heartbreak becomes the poem that reminds strangers they are not alone at 3 a.m. Maybe your brush with injustice steels you to advocate for those still silenced. Maybe your season of depression sensitizes you to subtle cries for help that others miss. In each case, the wound is not erased, it is repurposed. It becomes a bridge between your pain and someone else's hope. Purpose, however, is heavy. It asks you to carry what once crushed you, but this time as a lantern, not a burden. You must develop the muscles of emotional endurance, self-compassion, healthy detachment, disciplined rest, so the very thing that wounded you doesn't continue to bleed through the service you offer. Pain is the great interrupter. It barges in uninvited, an accident, a betrayal, a word that slices deeper than a knife, and suddenly the narrative you were writing for your life is ripped in half. Everything slows, the air thickens. You look at the mess of your heart and wonder how anything good could possibly grow from soil so scorched. But purpose is often born in precisely that place, where fire has stripped the landscape bare and the surface looks unusable. You see, life never wastes a wound. Wounds are portals. What passes through them can either be bitterness or brilliance, resentment or revelation. The choice, uncomfortable as it is, belongs to you. Transforming hurt into purpose does not begin with grand gestures. It starts quietly. The moment you decide your pain will not be pointless. You take inventory of the lessons etched into your scars. You ask hard questions. Eventually you realize that the greatest love story you'll ever experience is the one you build with yourself. And every time you say no more to someone who keeps hurting you, you're not just ending a cycle. You're rewriting your entire story. You're choosing dignity over desperation. You're choosing stillness over storms. You're choosing a future that isn't held hostage by the wounds of your past. Because self-worth is not just about believing you deserve better. It's about refusing to settle for less, even if less is all you've ever known. And the moment you stop waiting for someone else to save you from the pain they cause is the moment you finally start saving yourself. Because the pain you know feels safer than the unknown where no one promises to love you at all. But here's the truth. Real love, healthy love, never asks you to betray yourself to keep it. So you start small. You say no when your instincts scream yes out of fear. You walk away from the table when the only thing being served is emotional confusion. You give yourself the closure no one else will give you. You learn to live with the ache of loneliness rather than the ache of constant disrespect. And in time, that space you feared, the space left behind when you walk away, begins to bloom with possibility. You begin to notice that your peace isn't something you have to fight for every day, that your value doesn't depend on proving yourself to people who are determined not to see you, that your soul feels lighter when it's not walking on eggshells. And choosing yourself isn't an act of ego, it's an act of self-respect. It's what happens when you stop defining your value by how much you can endure and start defining it by how much peace you're willing to protect. When you stop accepting crumbs of affection and realize that love should never feel like begging. When you stop walking into conversations hoping someone sees your pain and start walking away from people who never will. Breaking the cycle is not just about leaving a person. It's about leaving the version of you who thought they needed to stay. It's grieving the part of you that believed loyalty meant self-abandonment. It's standing in the middle of your own heartbreak and saying, no more. I love myself too much to keep teaching people that it's okay to hurt me and stay. It's not easy. In fact, it might be one of the hardest things you ever do, because there's comfort in the familiar, even when the familiar hurts. There's a quiet moment in every journey when you realize something's repeating. The faces may change, the scenery may shift, but the pattern, the pain, the confusion, the disappointment, it looks painfully familiar. And in that moment, if you're honest with yourself, you recognize the truth you've been avoiding. You've been returning to people, situations, and environments that hurt you, not because you enjoy the pain, but because somewhere deep down, you believe that enduring it was proof of your worth. You kept showing up, you kept forgiving, you kept trying harder, being nicer, shrinking smaller, hoping that if you just got it right this time, they'd finally change. That this time, you'd be enough to fix what was always broken. That your love would be enough to teach them how to stop hurting you. But cycles don't end because you try harder. They end when you finally choose yourself. And when memory ambushes you, because it will, you practice gentle defiance. You remind yourself, yes, it happened. Yes, it hurt. And yes, I am still choosing peace. The mind may replay the scene 1,000 times, but each repetition loses power as you repeatedly anchor yourself in the present moment, where growth is happening, where love is still possible, where your future is unfolding without their permission. In the end, letting go without reconciliation is both a relinquishment and a reclamation. You relinquish the fantasy that the past can be rewritten. You reclaim the authority to shape what comes next. You do not need their words to validate your pain or their regret to elevate your value. You are the living proof that healing is a sovereign act, a quiet revolution inside your own chest. And every step you take away from the expectation of reconciliation is a step toward the vast, uncharted freedom of who you are becoming. There is equal strength, sometimes greater, in choosing simply to release. To say, I do not need to forgive in the traditional sense, but I do choose to let go. You set down the weight like a traveler dropping stones from an overpacked bag. You feel the surprising lightness, the sudden expansion of breath. In that space, new possibilities emerge. Relationships rooted in reciprocity, joys unshadowed by old resentments, mornings that taste like promise rather than punishment. Letting go without reconciliation also means rewriting the narrative of your worth. You are not unlovable because someone failed to love you well. You are not unworthy of kindness because another could not be kind. Their inability to repair the breach does not condemn you to permanent brokenness. It simply marks the limits of where they could journey with you. Beyond that point, the path is yours to clear, yours to walk, yours to adorn with the flowers of experiences yet to bloom. So you become the architect of your own closure. You gather the fragments of the story and narrate them for yourself, not to absolve them, but to understand you. You write the letter you will never send, speak the words to an empty chair, pour the unvoiced rage onto paper, and burn it in a quiet ritual. Each act is a declaration. My healing is mine to command. Some will say forgiveness is the only doorway to freedom, but forgiveness is not a single gesture handed down from a mountaintop. It is a messy, non-linear decision you make repeatedly. I will not let this memory poison my present. Forgiveness, in this sense, is less about absolving them and more about detoxifying your own heart. It does not erase boundaries, it reinforces them. It does not deny accountability, it releases the need for personal retribution. You forgive so that your energy is no longer siphoned by reliving the injury. Waiting for them to validate your experience keeps your spirit tethered to their timeline, their willingness, their capacity for courage. And some people, whether from pride, shame, or simple emotional limitation, may never find the fortitude to meet you in that vulnerable place. Letting go without reconciliation begins with an act of radical self-honesty. Admit what you wanted, the apology, the confession, the gesture that said, I see the hurt I caused. Name that desire out loud. Then acknowledge the reality. All the wishing in the world cannot bend another person's will. You can invite them into accountability, but you cannot drag them there. Their silence, their defensiveness, their refusal to engage, those do not reflect the validity of your wound. They illuminate the contours of theirs. There is a grief that lingers long after the initial wound closes. The grief of unfinished conversations, of apologies that never arrive, of explanations we will never hear. It is the hollow space between what happened and the resolution we hoped would make sense of it. We imagine that if they could just admit the harm, if they could acknowledge our pain, the shattered pieces of our heart would click back into place. So we wait, sometimes for months, sometimes for decades, holding our breath for reconciliation, the grand restoration that will finally grant us peace. But here's the hard truth that sets you free. You do not need their permission to heal. You can choose to unclench your fists around the memory. You can decide that your life will not be a courtroom where the verdict of their remorse determines your release. The power in courageous conversation lies in what it protects inside you. It shields your integrity from corrosion. It keeps you aligned with the person you are becoming, not the one your wound wants to become. It allows you to close chapters without burning the entire book. to exit rooms without shattering every window on the way out. And if they refuse to meet you, speak the words you need into the mirror, into a journal, into the listening ear of a trusted friend or therapist. The conversation still matters because the most important listener is your own soul. When you articulate your hurt calmly, clearly, completely, you validate your experience and release the poison of unspoken resentment. You acknowledge the stories your mind has spun and separate them from the facts you can name. Then you choose the moment when your pulse no longer pounds with fury, when your throat can open without shaking from rage. In that space, tempered, not timid, you request a conversation. Here is where courage steps in. You speak to be understood, not to win. You use words like, I felt, not you always. You describe the impact, not their identity. You let pauses hang heavy so meaning can land. And you give them the dignity of response, even if their response is denial, tears, or silence. Because courageous conversation is not a spell to change them. It is a ritual to free you. Sometimes they will apologize and growth will blossom in the clearing. Sometimes they will double down and the distance will crystallize. Either outcome delivers clarity. You will know whether there is ground for reconciliation or time for release. And that knowledge, untainted by vengeance, anchors your next step. Revenge is seductive because it masquerades as justice. It whispers promises of balance. That if you can make them feel even a fraction of what they made you feel, the scales will finally tip in your favor. But revenge is a boomerang made of anger. You throw it with force. Sure, it's aimed only at them, yet somehow it circles back and slices your own hand. Because harm, even justified harm, never leaves you clean. It stains the parts of you that were already bleeding. Courageous conversation is the opposite path. It asks you to trade fire for clarity, resentment for honesty, retaliation for responsibility. It is not soft. If anything, it is the hardest thing you can do after being wronged, because it requires you to stand in the raw center of your pain without using that pain as a weapon. To begin, you must gather your truth like fragile glass. Careful, deliberate, you examine what actually hurt, not what ego exaggerates. There's courage in asking for help, in not pretending, in finally taking off the mask you've worn to survive, and deciding you're done performing wholeness while your heart's still in pieces. Healing doesn't mean you'll never feel that pain again. It means you won't let it control you anymore. It means the pain loses its voice. It stops driving your decisions. It no longer chooses who you trust, how you love, or what you believe about yourself. And maybe the most empowering truth of all is this: healing is not about becoming who you were before they hurt you. It's about becoming someone stronger, softer, and wiser than you ever were. Someone who knows how to honor their emotions without being ruled by them. Someone who doesn't need revenge to feel validated. Someone who understands that scars don't ruin your beauty, they prove you survive. You have to choose to face what hurt you, not to relive it, but to understand it, to see it clearly, to stop blaming yourself for things you couldn't control, and start reclaiming the parts of you that got lost in the trauma. You must stop minimizing the pain, stop rationalizing the behavior of people who broke you, and stop convincing yourself that time alone will fix what you refuse to look at. Healing is it's messy, it's slow, it doesn't come with neat answers. It comes with vulnerability, with nights you cry unexpectedly, with truths you didn't want to admit, with questions that still don't have resolution. But inside that discomfort, there's freedom. There's power in sitting with your pain and saying, I deserve better than this. There's strength in choosing therapy or journaling or prayer or whatever form your soul uses to speak. Most people aren't afraid of pain, they're afraid of facing it. That's why they distract themselves. That's why they keep moving, working, pleasing, pretending. They say they're over it, but they're just avoiding it. They say it doesn't hurt anymore, but they can't sit in silence without feeling a sting in their chest. They say they've moved on, but their heart still flinches at the memory. That's not healing, that's hiding. Real healing isn't about forgetting what happened, it's about remembering without reopening the wound. But you can't do that if you're constantly outrunning the pain. Sooner or later, the ache you buried will come to the surface. It will leak into your relationships. It will twist the way you see yourself. It will replay in your mind like a scratched record, turning every quiet moment into a battlefield. And when that happens, you'll realize something vital. Healing doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. Because suddenly, the pain isn't defining you, it's informing you. It's helping you see who's safe, who's healthy, who's capable of love without harm. You begin to separate your identity from their dysfunction. You stop shrinking to fit their narrative. You stop bleeding yourself dry to fill someone else's emptiness. You are not what they said about you in anger. You are not the version of yourself they painted when they were hurting. You are not the aftershock of their trauma. You are whole, even if they couldn't see it. You are worthy, even if they made you feel otherwise. So when people hurt you, remember this. Don't carry their actions as your truth. Carry them as a signal of where they are in life, and walk away knowing your reflection was never the problem. You just stood in front of someone who didn't know how to see clearly. They can't regulate themselves, so they use manipulation, withdrawal, or blame as tools to feel in control. It's not personal. It feels personal, but it's not. You can love someone deeply and still not be the reason they're drowning. You can show up with grace, kindness, and consistency and still not be able to fix what they've refused to heal. And when they hurt you, it's not a verdict on your goodness. It's a loud echo of their own struggle, disguised as cruelty, neglect, or criticism. This understanding doesn't mean you should excuse their behavior. It doesn't mean what they did didn't matter. It just means you get to release the weight of self-blame. You get to say, that was never about me. That was about their journey, their wounds, their battles that I could never fight for them. And when you understand that, you take your power back. It was a reflection of their internal chaos, their unresolved pain, their inability to face their own emotional truth. When people lash out, pull away, or behave cruelly, they are often projecting, not thinking, not seeing you clearly, but reacting from something broken inside of them. You are not the origin of their pain. You're just standing close enough to feel the impact of it. It's like standing beside someone holding a glass of dirty water. The moment life shakes them, they spill what they've been carrying all along. You didn't cause it, but you're drenched in it anyway. That's how emotional pain works. The unhealed hurt in others often leaks into our lives in ways that leave us confused, bleeding, and questioning ourselves. but you must stop taking responsibility for someone else's emotional immaturity. Not everyone who hurts you is evil. Some are simply emotionally unequipped. They've never sat with their own pain long enough to understand it, so they hand it off to others. There's a trap many of us fall into after being hurt by someone we trusted, someone we believed in, someone we let close. We start asking ourselves dangerous questions. What did I do wrong? Was I not enough? Did I deserve that? Why would they treat me like that if they really cared? And in the silence left by betrayal or cruelty, we fill in the blanks with shame. We turn their actions inward, and suddenly their choices become our self-blame. But here's the truth most people never hear when they need it the most. What people do to you often says more about them than it ever could about you. Their betrayal wasn't proof of your unworthiness. Their absence wasn't evidence that you were too much. Their anger, manipulation, or indifference was never a mirror of your value. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to change the terms of your availability. The moment you start honoring your emotional space, your soul begins to heal from the damage done by those who mistook your silence for consent. The goal isn't to build an armored heart. The goal is to create a safe space around your life, where kindness is mutual, respect is consistent, and your peace is not up for negotiation. That's not being dramatic. That's being awake. So the next time you feel the urge to keep the peace at the cost of your own inner turmoil, ask yourself this: is their comfort worth my collapse? If the answer is no, let your boundary be the answer you never had the courage to give before. You're not hard to love. You're just no longer easy to use. They are bridges to keep you connected to yourself. They are the fences around your emotional garden, not to isolate, but to preserve what is growing within you. A boundary says, I love you, but I will not sacrifice my self-worth to stay close to you. It says, I'm not responsible for how you feel when I choose to protect myself. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. Too often, people confuse boundaries with coldness. They say you've changed. They accuse you of being selfish. But what they're really saying is, I no longer benefit from your lack of boundaries. And that's not your fault. It's your freedom. You don't need to scream, argue, or explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to justify your limits to those who repeatedly violate them. The truth is, if someone truly values you, they will learn your boundaries and respect them. If they don't, the discomfort they feel is theirs to carry, not yours to fix. There comes a moment in everyone's life when silence stops being strength and becomes self-abandonment. You keep quiet to keep the peace. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You convince yourself they didn't mean it. You let the hurt slide again and again. But each time you do, something inside you dims. And the worst part, you start to believe this is what love, friendship, or loyalty is supposed to feel like. Heavy, confusing, one-sided. That's the lie silent suffering feeds you. That to be a good person, a strong person, a spiritual person, you must absorb pain without response. But there is nothing holy about tolerating disrespect. There is nothing noble about being available to people who are emotionally reckless with you. That's where boundaries come in, not as punishment, but as protection. Boundaries are not about building walls to keep people out.